area, and I'm pleased that he acknowledged in response to my intervention that the balance, that he believes the balance in terms of local government funding in the previous government, with the Liberal Democrats were a part of, was got wrong. And I am very conscious of this because I've been spending quite a lot of time talking about local government elections in the last week or so back in Chesterfield. And it's hard to find, I have to say, in Chesterfield a Liberal Democrat who owns up to the government that their party was a part of. They seem to have disowned its records entirely. And I think the point that my honourable friend from Sheffield South East made during his contribution about the fact that at a time of austerity, the government department that's had the greatest hit has been local government. And it has been, I think, utter cowardice of a government to say there's going to be huge cuts. But we're not going to decide where they're going to fall. We're going to actually pass that decision to local authority leaders to decide whether they're going to shut a library or whether they're going to close a park or whether they're going to stop investing in their roads. We're going to outsource the pain. And I think about many people who became councillors after the 2015 elections, or after the 2013 elections even, and for the first time they were very excited, became councillors, and the very first council meeting they went to, the decisions they were faced with, what do you want to shut? You know, and that's what the reality of many local authorities has been. And so I think it's absolutely right that the motion that my honourable friend and others have put forward focuses on that unfairness, and I referred previously to the fact that in Chesterfield we've had a 43.2% cut. We've got a minister that was sat making a speech as the honourable member for Old Bexley and Sidcup, sat with his own local authority having a cut of just 12% in their funding. We heard the honourable member for Ludlow speaking up for that and saying, oh, the problem with the Labour government was they were sending all the money to the poor areas. Well, I'm very proud that a Labour government did make those decisions and recognise the role that local authorities have in supporting the most deprived in our societies. But when I was back in Chesterfield talking about the local elections, I was very, very proud of the record that our local authority in Chesterfield has. And one of the things they have done is recognise that in a time of austerity, with these very unfair cuts coming from government, what they need to do is make innovative choices that actually enable us to provide better services that actually cost less. So they invested in a new leisure centre and saw that the amount that the council was having to subsidise that leisure centre, instead of being £1.5 million, as it was every single year under the Liberal Democrats, because more people were using it, because it was better facilities, they only had to spend £300,000 a year on that. Similarly, they invested in our culture facilities, and so the theatre and the concert venue that we have has seen a 60% reduction in the amount that is having to be subsidised because they're getting more punters through the door because they've got better facilities. We've got less empty shop units than most other local authority areas of a similar sort, and they've done very innovative things like bringing a big wheel into the centre of Chesterfield that massively increased the number of people coming in to visit the town centre, and an innovative record on tackling homelessness. They had a really excellent display at the 100th anniversary of the remembrance of the 1914 to 1918 conflict, which again saw the poppy cascades in not just from the town hall but from a huge variety of different retail units. So it is a council that has recognised that actually you need sometimes to invest in order to save money, that you need to be innovative if you want to have a local authority that people are proud of. And they've done that all the time, that they've managed to keep council tax as the lowest level in Derbyshire. And we know that Labour councils cost you less. The average cost per household is £351 less in areas with Labour councils in comparison to Tory areas. And we know when we talk about the areas that have been most likely to go bust, there have been areas like Northamptonshire, like Surrey, under Tory authorities, because Labour councils not only run their local authorities better than Tory authorities, but they cost less and they innovate more. So I'm very proud of the record that I'm going to be going out to defend. But I do also want to talk about so social care aspect, because this is an area I know a great deal about. I spent a very tough year of my career as a care manager for a private provider who provided domiciliary care to Sheffield City Council. And I think one of the things that's missing from this whole debate and talk about social care is the extent to which it is an industry rather than a service in terms of the way that it's set up. The vast majority of domestic care providers are private sector businesses. The vast majority of care homes are run by private sector, and the private sector has as its number one priority to make profit. And we shouldn't be surprised that if we get private sector companies involved, they try and make a profit out of it. Is ultimately what companies exist for. The councils often get private sector involved because they're trying to save money, and they recognise that the terms and conditions that local authority staff will work on will be more generous than they are in the private sector. And so these are all knock-on consequences of the overall spending pressures that they've got. And I think that relationship between councils and their providers is a very important one, and far too often councils outsource the responsibility for these services. They sign up to contracts that anyone studying it must know are unsustainable, and there is some responsibility on some of those local authorities for the decisions that they take. And I say, as someone who worked with carers, I take my hat off to people who work in the care industry. I know they're amongst the most dedicated and professional people, often work in incredibly difficult circumstances for an absolute pittance. And I know that whether they had a uniform on with a local authority badge on it, or whether they're working for a private company, they had real commitment to the people that they provided care for. But we are seeing that industry in absolute crisis. There are over 100 care homes that have gone bust in the last 2 years or so. There are dozens of domestic care providers going bust too. Allied Healthcare, the company I used to work for, in 2018 was literally days away from bankruptcy. And every time one of these authorities go bust, the onus for that care responsibility falls on the local authority again. And so, the government really need to understand that when you have the scale of cuts that we've had over the last 9 years, a single year uplift and saying, well, we're ring-fencing this small amount of, £2.5 billion, small amount of money, but in comparison to the cuts that we'd had in previous years, it was an inadequate amount of money. They can't then wash their hands, as the Minister did earlier, to the fact that the industry is in crisis and these businesses are going bust. And when the industry is in crisis, what that means is it means 15-minute appointments. It means dementia patients seeing a different carer every day, and that consistency of care for dementia patients is so important. It means that the service that they receive goes down. It means that their families see that their relatives are deeply troubled by the services that they're receiving because of the inconsistency of it, and that's incredibly troubling for their families. It means local authorities saying that they won't pay travelling time, and then that responsibility falling again onto the companies. And we've seen recently the courts deciding that sleepovers need to be paid at national minimum wage, where previously many care companies didn't pay it on that basis. Now, I support that decision, but there has to be a connected part to that, which is where government goes back and recognises that local authorities were doing tenders on the basis that they wouldn't be paid at national minimum wage, that if you were sleeping on the job you could be paid on a different basis. That it's now retrospectively been decided that that isn't the case, and that there needs to be money paid by local authority to those private providers, and there needs to be money coming from central government to fund that from local authorities. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see these businesses going bust, and we're going to continue to see the people who rely on those services being diminished. And all of these cuts to care have consequences. When you haven't got care services available, you see people turning up in A&E. We've got 20% of people in A&E that should be in a hospital bed that can't get admitted. At the same time, we've got 20% of hospital beds with people filled with people that actually can't get out because there isn't a care package waiting. We've already had my colleagues, like my friend from Hull West, talking about the impact in children's social care, then falling on special needs, on schools, on things like a failure to diagnose autism, which then has a knock-on impact right across the school and other areas. So all of these services are connected, and we can't look at social care and local government finances in isolation. I have met with the Managing Director of One-to-One a company in my constituency who provide provide excellent care services to many local authorities, and they've told me about the knock-on consequences. They've told me about the impact that these funding cuts on local authorities are then having on their ability to get paid, and they're often owed tens of thousands of pounds by local authorities who are struggling to actually manage this administration. So the industry is in crisis, local government is in crisis. The government have two choices. They either step up to the mark and then convince us that they're serious about the social funding crisis, or they continue in the way they're going and everyone will realise that this is something that lands at their door.